Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar in our brand new pandemic e-learning series titled Adapting to the New Normal. Today, we will be discussing the Finance Edition. So my name is Jane Soper. I'm the marketing coordinator here at Sparkrock, and I will be your moderator for today's event. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome our speaker for today's webinar, Stephanie Gunn. Stephanie is a senior finance consultant here at Sparkrock, and chances are many of you know her very well. For the past 3 years, she's been helping our customers with the delivery of finance products and ensuring the continuous improvement of Sparkrock's finance tools. So with that, Stephanie, thank you so much for taking the time to present this webinar for us today. Please take it away.
Awesome, thanks, Jane. So as Jane mentioned, today we are going through the webinar on adapting to the new normal finance edition. Obviously, with changes in the world recently, many of you are adapting and changing your functional processes in order to better serve yourselves now that we're all mostly at home. So just to go through our agenda, we went through the introduction. Next, we'll go through our learning objectives. Then we'll go through a bit of a walkthrough and demonstration. And as Jane mentioned, at the end, we'll be going through a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please enter them into the chat and we'll be able to answer them at the end of the session. So in today's session, what we'll be going through is different finance areas that may help you rework some of your functional processes or better adapt to not being in the office. So things like setting up new dimensions or values, configuring approval workflows, approval administration, workflows on journals and documents and how to use them, as well as employee center approvals. And finally, we'll look at some of the enhancements to approvals and workflows made in Sparkrock 365 for those customers who are either currently in an upgrade project or looking to go live on Sparkrock 365. So first, we'll look at setting up new dimensions or values. So as we've all kind of gone away from the office, as people may be leaving or may be unavailable for periods of time, you may be considering setting up new dimensions in order to reroute approvals where they need to go. So setting up a new dimension entirely within the system does need to be considered carefully as it may impact your configuration and actual use of the system. So if you are finding that you're looking at needing an entirely new dimension, please consult with Sparkrock before making any system dimension changes. There may be configuration that you're unaware of or that your IT systems are unaware of, and it's likely something that would be better done with a consultant, at least to guide you through the process. Aside from that, we'll also look at setting up new dimension values. So aside from an actual dimension, you may need to set up new dimension values where you're consolidating departments, where different people now require different approvals, and just to sort of get around some approval challenges that you may be facing. So we'll take a look at setting up these new dimension values. So first we'll look at a demonstration of that. So if I go into Sparkrock 2016. So we're currently looking at NAV 2016. We'll be going through today's session within NAV, and as I mentioned, just looking briefly at 365 at the end. So here I can see all of my dimensions within my demo company. Now there are quite a lot as they've been used for different functions, but here we have essentially 8 main dimensions. As I mentioned, adding any additional dimension to your structure may impact your configuration, so I would not recommend taking on that challenge by yourself. However, if it is something you're looking at, reach out and contact us. Now, you may have the situation where a department is being consolidated, or maybe different projects or programs are being consolidated, or just new ones are happening as we sort of adjust to these changes. If you're within the system and you need to set up a new dimension value, you can do so simply from the dimension page. Now that can be found under administration, dimensions, or as always, just by searching for dimensions. Once on this page, you'll just need to go to actions or navigate and go to dimension values. This will show you all of your current active dimension values. And here you can see whether or not any of them are blocked. So if you're in the situation where maybe now several different departments are consolidating into a single group, You could then go and create a new dimension value called, we're going to call this Now, at this point, what you'll want to do is if you're consolidating dimensions or changing them, you may want to block the old dimension values, as these dimensions would likely no longer be applicable, and just leave the new dimension value available. Now, keep in mind that whenever you change a dimension value, whenever you block a dimension value, or if you choose to delete a dimension value, there are other considerations. So once we've changed our dimension value, now we also need to think, where else will this impact in the system? If there's currently any transactions that are unposted with block dimension values now, those will need to be adjusted and changed before they can be posted in the system. If there is any requests, whether that's a purchase requisition, payment requisition, or employee expense with that current coding, that will also need to be adjusted. Now keep in mind this also will impact your account set. If you have account sets using these dimension values, they may need to be updated, or you may need to create new account sets. So just something to keep in mind that when doing any dimension value changes, several different things can come from it. Now, along with doing a dimension value change, you'll likely also have to change either workflow approvals or your employee center approvals. So now we'll take a look again at going through sort of how you can best configure those workflow approvals once you've adjusted the actual structure of your dimensions. So in configuring workflow approvals, they can be set up for several different areas of the system. They can be used on almost all journals, purchase documents, and sales documents. So things like invoices, your credit memos, and even potentially orders. They can also support multiple approval levels and options. So workflows within 2016 are for the backend side of the system. They handle all finance approvals. And then within the system, there'll be email notifications and reminders to the users of who actually needs to go through and set up and release and approve those approval workflows. The nice thing about having approval workflows in the system is that it does mean there is an internal audit trail for all approvals. Now that we've kind of backed away from the office, you may not be able to physically review things or assign things. Having that actual structure in the system is definitely beneficial, especially when we get to audit time, to ensure that every transaction going through has been approved, has been reviewed, and is necessary and complete and accurate. So looking at our approval workflows, we have several different options here of who can approve a workflow. We can look at a direct approver approving a workflow. We can look at one person approving everything. We can look at multiple approvers approve. We can look at one of multiple approvers approve, or also look at salesperson approvals. So depending on the needs of your individual workflows, whether it's on general journals, payment journals, cash receipts, invoices, credit memos, we can use and combine different types of approval structures in order to best identify who needs to approve a document. So on the screen here, you'll see that I'm looking at a workflow user group used in approvals. Here you can see that there are 3 approvals at level 1. There are 2 approvals at level 2. And in this instance, what you could do is you could have everyone at level 1 needs to approve and everyone at level 2 needs to approve. Or alternatively, you could also do where only one person at level 1 needs to approve and only one person at level 2 needs to approve. So as we sort of figure things out and people may be going on leave or maybe unavailable, it's often really beneficial to have more than one approver available if in the case that you need to have someone else approve it without needing to go and physically delegate it down. So looking at the approval structures, that also brings us to approval administration. So within the system, once you've set up your workflows, you do also need to consider approval administration. Now, within NAV 2016, there's typically one approval administrator, and they take on specific tasks related to workflows. So these tasks are around setting up approval users and substitutes, setting up user approval limits. It also goes around delegating approvals and as well as maintaining and updating all workflows. Now, with a lot of change going on, it is important that someone really takes on this role if you are using workflows within the system, as changes may need to be made fairly frequently now as compared to before. So if you have someone who's able to maintain those, typically it could be sort of your finance super user, it might be an IT administrator, a business analyst, whoever you've identified within your team to sort of take on and own that role. Now, as mentioned, you can use workflows on many different types of journals and documents. There are many different approval workflow templates available in the system, and specifically the ones most often used are related to general journals, cash receipts journals, payment journals, purchase orders. You can also use approval workflows on things like purchase invoices and credit memos. However, it's not the most efficient way to achieve that. If you're looking to have additional approval functionality on purchase order or purchase invoices and credit memos, please consider just using the AP batch functionality if you aren't already. And you can also use workflows on things like sales orders and sales invoices and credit memos. So on the screen here, you'll see all of the different templates, and the system will actually allow you to go through and create them. So now we'll go through and take a look within Nav and look at the actual setup of workflows, the administration, and how to use them. So from my departments page, I'll find workflows set up under administration and application setup. So all of your workflow structures will be set up here. If I drill into workflows, I'll see all of my active workflows within the system. So here I can see I've set up my different journal workflows, purchase orders, as well as the sales workflows that I require. So before setting up a workflow, someone will need to go ahead and set up the workflow users. So within the system, you'll need to go to Approval User Setup, which is where all of your users will be defined. So within the Approval User Setup, this is where you'll set up all of your Nav users. It's who you say their direct approver is, if they have any. You can also input sales approval amounts and purchase approval amounts, as well as allowing them unlimited approval. And it's also where you can allow them unlimited request approval. Now, within this time, you may also be looking at adding substitutes where you may not be doing before. So as I mentioned, you can set up your workflows so that more than one person can approve. You can also set up substitutes for people who have maybe gone on leave or maybe returning in the future. So if someone has current active approvals and they need to actually go on leave, you can then define a substitute user for them who can then go in and approve their workflow approvals. Now, if there are any active approvals within the system, the approval administrator will need to go through and actually delegate those approvals down. When we take a look at the workflow structure, we can see how to do that automatically. As I also mentioned, you will require at least one workflow or approval administrator, and this person is the one who will need to be doing the delegation and certain tasks within workflows. So if I go back to my active workflows, I can take a look at a workflow and see how it's actually set up. So we can always create a new workflow from a template. Here I'll create a new general journal batch workflow just for an example, and it will bring in all of the workflow steps that you require. At this point, it is currently not enabled. In order to edit any workflow, it does need to be disabled. And then you can always add filters. So on a journal workflow here, you may choose to do maybe purchase journals if that's an area of the system that you're using. Here you can see we have things like general, sales, purchases, cash receipts, payments, assets, intercompany, and job journals. So you can filter here in order to get the right approval. Aside from that, this is also where we'll set up who the approver on this type of workflow will be. So if I drill into my record restrictions, I can see that it's going to say create an approval request for blank. And this will be where I actually go ahead and set up that approver. So here I can say what I want my due date to be. The due date will define when workflow notifications and reminders start coming out. So once they hit the overdue date, they'll start getting reminders for the approvals. So maybe you do 2 days. You can also choose to automatically delegate workflow approvals. So in this case, when we looked at workflow user setup, you saw that there were substitutes. If you would like to automatically substitute for direct approvers, you can choose to delegate after X number of days. On the approver type, we also have different types of approvers. Here we can do an approver, which can be a direct approver, or rather the first qualified approver, or all approvers within the chain. You can also use the salesperson if you're looking at doing purchase order approvals. And finally, you may want to use a workflow user group. So if I go and I look at my workflow user group, I can see here that this is where I can set up a workflow user group with more than one person on a single level. So depending on how I configure this, I can have one of these users approve, and then the final user in step 2 approve. Alternatively, if I would like, I can also have all users approve, but typically you would just sequence them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in that case. So once I've chosen the approval group, then I select OK, and my workflow is able to be enabled. So once I enable, I have current active records in the system that it's going to interact with. So it's going to say, you know, there's another workflow that you've created that will interact with this, and I know it's that one. So in this case, I'll actually just delete this one. Because I already have an active workflow set up in the system. So once you've actually set up and enabled all of your workflows, you can then start to use them on journals and documents. When you're within any journal, you'll find the approval under the Actions tab, which will be Send Approval Request, and then Journal Batch. Once this is done, it will restrict the record, so it cannot be posted at this point, and you'll see that it creates an active workflow down here. So I can go into here and I can see all of the steps that it's being taken to create the workflow. Now on things like sales, you'll also find a similar tab under Actions, which will allow you to send an approval request. The same thing will happen. It will restrict the record. And because the workflow is enabled, no one will be able to actually post this before having it approved. So in this case, I cannot even release it until it's been approved through the workflow. So within here, you'll also then see the step instances. In this case, once there are active statuses, I cannot actually delete a record or a workflow. I'd need to go into the record itself and actually choose unrequest, or someone from the administrative level may need to go into restricted records and actually delegate or cancel that approval. So aside from looking at them here on the backend side, we can also look at our employee center approvals. So within Employee Center, if you're using that within your organization, you can manage users and delegates directly from NAV 2016. You can maintain approval thresholds and threshold approvers. You have the options to mass update threshold approvers, and you can also update user profiles and permissions for new responsibilities. So here, you can assign delegates to staff on leave from the backend system. You may have chosen to allow your users themselves to assign delegates, but if not, if they've gone on unexpected leave, but they are expected to return, you can actually go ahead and assign delegates from NAV. So this will allow you to delegate approvals. You can also delegate the ability to enter purchase requisitions, requisition entries, payment requisitions, and expense claims. So here you can see that under our Employee Center user delegates, I have actually delegated my approval responsibility for the month of April. This will allow that user to come in and act on my behalf with permissions inherited by me in my role in order to approve things that they need to, that I would typically approve. If a user is not expected to return or it's unknown when they'll return, you may also choose to mass update threshold approvers. So there is functionality within the system to reassign approval thresholds to a new user, reassign open approvals, and email approvals to new approvers. So you'll see here, this is our mass update approver section. I can say that I would like to rename all approvers from a specific approver to another one, if in the case that we're not sure if they'll return or maybe their return to work will be extended. So again, looking at nav, you'll also find all of your employee center setup under departments, administration, application setup, and web apps. So this is where you'll find your approval thresholds, which will be determined based on your dimension values. So this brings us back to if you are updating dimensions or adding new dimension values, blocking dimensions or getting rid of them, you will need to come into your approval thresholds and update them, as well as go into the threshold approvers and update them as well. Now, if a user has gone on leave, what we can do is directly from their user card, we can see who they've delegated to within the system. Again, I can see that I've delegated to Kinley. He'll be my approver. And I also have the option to run the mass update threshold approvers. So directly from here, if I know maybe my user was going on leave and I need to reassign, or maybe my role is changing and I need to reassign all of my approvals, I can go here. I can filter by specific approvals, whether it's going to be maybe just all of my administration. And then I can go ahead and choose who I would like to assign it to, and then whether or not to reassign pending or open approvals, and to email all new requests to the approval. So when I'm updating these approvals, I want to assign anything old that's sitting open, and I also want to email the new approver to let them know, there's things that you need to approve now. So within Sparkrock 2016, some of the setup regarding workflows and employee center was a little different. Some of our setup has changed in Sparkrock 365. There's been some improvements made to both workflows and employee center approvals. So here, just to speak to some of the enhancements that we've made in Sparkrock 365. So improvement to workflow approvals. You now have approvals on additional areas of the system, like budget journals and recurring journals, where they weren't before. You also now have additional approver structures available using specific approvers, as well as you can define approvals via user's position. So previously, you would always need to change the user. If they changed roles or positions, you can actually define a user approval now by saying the person sitting in this role, they're the one who needs to approve this. Now, you do need to be integrated with HRP in order to use this functionality, but that way you're not constantly updating things in two areas. When their position changes, it will automatically update the approvals. As well as workflows, we've had improvements to our finance approval rules on our My Sparkrock or an employee center side. So now we are allowing different approval structures between purchase requisitions and payment requests. So if you have different purchasing policies from payment policies, you can again set up specific approvers or approval groups. You also have approvals by user's position now, and you now have the ability to combine GL and dimensions together in order to define approvals. Previously in the approval thresholds and threshold approvers, you could only do it by one dimension value. Now you can see below, we have a matrix in order to set up the actual approval that we need on specific things that are going through the system. Much like our mass update approvers, we now also have the replace users function, which gives you a little bit more flexibility in that you can now update users for both approvals, groups, and requests. And you can actually also set an effective date and future date this for the future if you know someone's going on leave. So that takes us through sort of different areas of the system and how to configure new dimension values, how we work through setting up workflows in order to best get the approvals that we need when we're not all together. You might not have easy access to other members of your organization, as well as some coming enhancements in Sparkrock 365, which may make those things all a little easier.
So that wraps up our webinar for today. Thank you again, Stephanie, so much for taking the time out of your day to present. This was fantastic. And thank you so much to everyone who joined us. We know that these times are difficult, and we really appreciate you giving us your time. So thank you so much. Stay safe and take care.
Yes, thank you everyone as well.